Single dad says, "I'll take care of you and the child." And the millionaire's reaction changes everything. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and neither had Victoria's silence. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse office, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other pressed flat against the cold glass, as if she could push through it and disappear. 32 years old, 6 months pregnant, and completely, devastatingly alone. But no one imagined what would come next. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, not a gentle drizzle, but the heavy, relentless kind that drums against windows and floods gutters and makes the whole world feel like it's being washed clean of something, or washed away entirely. Victoria Harmon stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office on the 42nd floor of Harmon Innovations' Chicago headquarters, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, the other cradled beneath the curve of her belly. 6 months. 6 months since the night that had split her life into before and after. She was 32 years old, CEO of a technology company valued at $400 million. She wore a black wool coat over a deep brown blouse, a fitted black skirt, and heels that added 3 inches to her already composed posture. From the outside, Victoria Harmon looked like a woman in complete control. From the inside, she was running on the thinnest possible thread of herself. Her husband, Daniel, had died on a Tuesday. That was the detail that haunted her most, not a Friday, not a Sunday, not a day with any poetic gravity. A Tuesday in October, on a highway slicked with early rain, when a commercial truck drifted across the center line, and that was all. Gone. And Victoria had been left standing in a hospital hallway at 11:47 at night, still wearing the blazer from her afternoon board meeting, while a doctor spoke words she kept hearing and couldn't absorb. Daniel had known about the baby. They had celebrated quietly, at home, over dinner the week before he died. He had pressed his warm palm against her stomach and laughed, that low, unhurried laugh she had loved since their first date. She'd taken a photograph of his hand resting there. It was still her phone's lock screen. She hadn't been able to change it. She wasn't sure she ever would. The office door opened behind her. Her assistant, Claire, entered with the careful, measured quiet of someone who had learned precisely how much space Victoria needed on any given morning and adjusted accordingly. Claire was 26, exceptionally organized, and wise enough to know that some silences were not invitations to fill. Today, though, she spoke. "Mrs. Harmon, the Morrison account is pending your signature, and your 2 o'clock shifted to 3. A brief pause. "Also, HR flagged the Henderson maintenance situation again. The revised vendor proposal came in this morning." Victoria did not turn from the window. "Send it to legal." Legal returned it. "They say final authorization has to come directly from you." She turned then. Claire stood near the door holding a slim tablet, her expression professionally neutral. Victoria crossed the room, took the tablet, scrolled through the proposal in under a minute, and handed it back. "Tell them we accept the labor rates. Not the liability cap. They come up to $2 million or we find another vendor." "Understood." Claire made a note, then hesitated at the door. "Have you eaten today? I can have something sent up from the cafe downstairs." Victoria almost smiled. "I ate." It was a lie. Claire knew it was a lie, but Claire simply nodded and left. And that wordless understanding was the particular language of their working relationship, one built on respect and the mutual agreement not to press where pressing would not help. Alone again, Victoria returned to her desk. The surface was immaculate. A single framed photograph sat in the corner, angled so that she could see it from her chair, but a visitor couldn't easily see it from the door. Daniel and Victoria on their honeymoon in Positano 2 years ago. He was mid-laugh at something she had said. She looked happy in a way that felt almost foreign now, like looking at a picture of a woman she used to be and could only partially remember. She opened her laptop and worked, because working was the one thing left that she could do without fracturing. 40 minutes passed. Then the office line rang, not her cell, but the direct line, which was flagged only for a short list of internal contacts. She glanced at the display. Gerald Weston, head of building facilities. unusual. "We have a small situation in the lobby," Gerald said when she answered, his voice carrying the specific strain of someone trying to sound calm about something that wasn't entirely calm. "Define small, Gerald." A pause. "The Henderson crew sent a new team this morning. One of the workers, he brought his daughter, says his regular sitter cancelled at the last minute. He didn't want to miss the first day on a new contract. He's asking if there's somewhere she can wait, just for a few hours." Victoria set her pen down. "This is a corporate office." "I know, I told him." "He says there's no one else." Another pause, smaller this time. "She's 7 years old, Victoria. Sitting in the lobby with a yellow dress and a little backpack, looking at the elevator like she's never seen one before." Victoria closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. Then, "Put them in the small conference room on 2. Not 3. 3 has the Morrison documents. Get her something from the cafe. Juice and a sandwich." "Yes, thank you." She hung up. She did not go downstairs. She had work to complete, and she was not, in any emotional or physical condition, to be near a small child today. Every small child she encountered lately did the same thing to her. Cracked open the door she worked hardest to keep closed, the one behind which lived everything Daniel would never see. She kept that door shut. She had learned to. An hour later, her lower back began its slow, insistent complaint, a discomfort that had arrived reliably every afternoon for the past 2 months, as if her body had set a daily reminder that it was carrying something enormous and she was not allowed to forget it. She decided to walk to the 2nd floor to stretch and retrieve a document from the Morrison file herself. She stepped off the elevator and turned down the hall. And then she heard it. A voice, a man's voice, low and unhurried, carrying from behind the closed conference room door, and then, piercing through the corporate quiet like a small bright bell, a child's laugh, sudden and clear and utterly unguarded. It lasted only a moment before it was gently hushed, but it had already changed the texture of the air around it. Victoria stopped. She told herself she was simply checking the corridor. She crossed toward the conference room, glanced through the glass panel in the door as she passed, and saw them. A man seated at the far end of the long table, his back mostly to her, wearing a grey button-down shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows. Dark jeans and polished black dress shoes that were slightly at odds with the rest of his working man appearance. Across from him, feet swinging beneath the chair, was a little girl in a yellow dress, small white shoes, hair the color of summer wheat, falling in 2 uneven braids. She had enormous brown eyes fixed on something the man was drawing on a yellow legal notepad. He was drawing a horse. It was rough, obviously lopsided, and almost certainly worse than what a 7-year-old could have produced herself. The girl leaned forward, studied it, and said something that made the man pull the notepad back toward him, look at his own drawing with apparent sincerity, and then, quietly, almost privately, laugh. He handed her the pen. Victoria stood in the hallway and did not move. She could not have explained even to herself why she stayed. There was nothing remarkable about what she was watching. A man and his daughter waiting in a conference room. That was all. And yet something about it, the ease between them, the way his shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the way she leaned toward him without thinking, the way he gave her the pen, pressed against something inside Victoria's chest with a weight that had nothing to do with the baby. Then, as if he had sensed it, the man turned. He looked directly at her through the glass, not startled, not embarrassed. His eyes were dark brown, steady and calm in the way that belongs to people who have long since made peace with being underestimated. He held her gaze for a moment, not challenging, not deferential, just present. Then he gave a single quiet nod, the kind of nod that said, "I see you. I won't make this strange if you don't." Victoria straightened and walked away. She did not look back, but her hand, as she turned the corner toward the Morrison files, was trembling slightly, and she stood there in the document room for a full minute before she remembered why she had come downstairs. Something had shifted. She didn't know yet what it was. She didn't know yet that the man in the grey shirt had a name, Nathan Cole, or that he had been raising his daughter Lily alone for the past 4 years, or that he had a particular and almost uncanny gift for recognizing pain in people who were working very hard not to show it. She didn't know any of that yet. But somewhere in the back of her chest, behind the locked door she kept so carefully guarded, something had moved. Just slightly, just enough. And that, though she didn't know it yet, was how everything began. Nathan Cole had learned many things in 35 years of living. But the most useful thing he'd ever learned was this. You can tell almost everything about a person by what they do when they think nobody is watching. He'd seen the woman through the glass, blonde, poised, coat buttoned over a pregnancy she clearly wasn't advertising to the world. She'd stopped in that hallway and looked at him and Lily for a moment that was a little too long to be accidental. And then she'd walked away with her spine perfectly straight and her chin level, and her eyes giving nothing. He recognized that posture. He had seen it before in different forms, on different people. It was the posture of someone holding something very heavy and refusing to let anyone help them carry it. He hadn't thought much more about it. He was there to work. Nathan had joined the Henderson maintenance crew 8 months ago after a decade of running his own small repair and renovation business out of Evanston. The business hadn't failed exactly. It had simply been quietly dismantled by the reality of being a single father without a reliable support system. When his ex-wife Dana left 4 years ago, not for another man, not for any dramatic reason, just because she had decided the life she had wasn't the life she wanted, she had left Lily. Too, not in anger, almost politely. She had packed her things over a weekend while Lily was at Nathan's mother's house, left a note that was more goodbye than explanation, and moved to Portland. Lily had been 3 years old. Nathan had handled it the way he handled most things, by getting up the next morning and doing what needed doing. He had reorganized his schedule, renegotiated his contracts, found a sitter he trusted, and raised his daughter. He had not dated. He had not complained, at least not to anyone who couldn't handle it. He had coached Lily's soccer team last spring, helped her through a brief but intense terror of thunderstorms the previous winter, and learned, through trial and significant error, how to do a reasonably acceptable 7-year-old's braid. The braid was important to Lily. He'd gotten better. He was in the Harmon Innovations building to assess the HVAC routing on the 2nd and 3rd floors. A 2-day job, maybe 3, if the ductwork behind the east wall was as complicated as the original blueprint suggested. His usual sitter, Mrs. Patterson, had called at 6:30 that morning with a genuine apology and a bad knee that had given out overnight. Nathan had spent 20 minutes calling everyone he trusted before accepting the fact that today Lily was coming with him. She had been, characteristically, delighted. Lily Cole was 7 years old and had her father's calm and her mother's curiosity, and a quality entirely her own. A kind of earnest, watchful openness to the world that made strangers feel, within about 4 minutes of meeting her, that she was genuinely interested in them as people. She was not shy. She was not loud. She was simply and thoroughly present in whatever room she occupied. In the conference room on the 2nd floor of Harmon Innovations, she had eaten half a turkey sandwich, drank all of her apple juice, and was now working on a drawing of what she called a horse but better than Dad's, on the legal notepad Nathan had given her. He sat across from her with the building schematics open on his phone, mapping the ductwork and trying to triangulate where the reported pressure drop was coming from. "Dad," Lily said, without looking up from her drawing. That lady was watching us." Nathan glanced up. "What lady?" "The one in the hall." "Outside the window." Lily shaded carefully around her horse's mane. She looked sad. Nathan looked back at his phone. "People look sad sometimes, Lil." "I know." A pause. She looked really sad, like she was trying not to be. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a very specific observation for a 7-year-old. Lily looked up at him with an expression of absolute patience. "You always say that. Because you always do it." She returned to her drawing, satisfied. Nathan returned to his schematics. But he kept thinking about the woman in the hall. The careful posture, the hand pressed briefly against her side, the moment before she walked away when something had crossed her face that she'd clearly decided not to let cross it. He thought, whoever she is, She's carrying something she doesn't have words for yet. He'd learned to recognize that too. From his mother, after his father died. From his friend Marcus, 2 years ago, after Marcus's son was hospitalized. From Dana, though he hadn't recognized it in time to do anything about it. You learned to read that particular kind of silence if you paid attention long enough, the kind that wasn't emptiness, but weight. At 2:15, Nathan collected his tools, folded the schematics, and knocked on the door of the facilities office down the hall to check in with Gerald Weston. Gerald was a thick-set, comfortable man in his late 50s who clearly preferred spreadsheets to people but made a decent effort. "Second floor east looks manageable," Nathan told him. "The drop's probably a damper issue, maybe a seal on the return duct. I'll know more tomorrow when I get into the ceiling on 3. Gerald nodded. "Good. Let me know if you need building access after hours." Nathan was about to leave when Gerald lowered his voice slightly, glancing toward the hall. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Harmon doesn't usually authorize exceptions like today, bringing your daughter in. She made a specific call." Nathan considered that. "I'll thank her." Gerald looked mildly alarmed. "She's a busy woman. She doesn't really—" "I'll keep it brief." He found Lily waiting in the hall, backpack on, horse-drawing carefully folded and tucked into the front pocket. She had also, apparently, introduced herself to one of the administrative assistants, a woman named Deborah, who was now looking at Lily with the expression of someone who had just had a pleasant and mildly disarming conversation and wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. "Made a friend?" Nathan asked. "Her name is Deborah and she has a cat named Biscuit," Lily reported. "She showed me a picture." "Of course she did." They took the elevator to 42. Nathan had asked Deborah where he might find Mrs. Harmon, which was probably slightly above his pay grade socially, but he had never been particularly intimidated by hierarchy, and gratitude seemed like the right response to someone who'd made an exception they hadn't been obligated to make. The assistant outside Mrs. Harmon's office, young, organized-looking, clearly accustomed to fielding unexpected arrivals, looked up with polite professionalism. "Can I help you?" "I'm Nathan Cole, from Henderson Maintenance. I just wanted to thank Mrs. Harmon for the accommodation this morning. I'll only take a minute." The assistant, her nameplate read Claire, glanced toward the closed office door. Then back at him, then at Lily, who was holding the folded horse drawing and looking at the wall of framed architectural photographs behind Claire's desk with transparent curiosity. "One moment," Claire said. She knocked and entered. A murmur of voices. She reappeared. "She'll see you. 2 minutes." Nathan straightened his shirt, looked at Lily, and nodded once. Lily nodded back, the same way. They went in. Victoria Harmon was standing behind her desk rather than sitting at it, a subtle position of control that Nathan recognized and understood. She was watching them with those same careful, composed eyes he'd seen through the conference room glass. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected, and more tired than she'd looked from a distance, and there was something in the set of her jaw that told him she'd decided, before they walked in, that this would be brief and professional, and that was all. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Mrs. Harmon." He kept it simple. "I just wanted to say thank you for letting Lily wait here today. I know it wasn't standard, and I appreciate it." Victoria's gaze moved to Lily for just a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not much, but something. Then it resettled. "I hope it didn't disrupt her day." "It was the best day," Lily said earnestly. From beside Nathan. "Deborah has a cat." A silence fell. And then, very small, very brief, almost inaudible, Victoria Harmon laughed. It was not a polished, professional sound. It was involuntary and genuine, and it lasted about 2 seconds before she visibly caught it and tucked it back away. But it had happened. Lily beamed as if she had accomplished something important, which, Nathan thought, she probably had. "Thank you for your time," Nathan said. "We'll be out of your way." He turned to go. He was at the door when he heard it, a sound behind him, very quiet. That wasn't a word exactly. More like a breath that had intended to be a word and changed its mind halfway. He turned back. Victoria Harmon was standing exactly where he'd left her, both hands now pressed flat against the desk, her eyes fixed at a point somewhere between the window and the floor. Her face had closed over completely. That door, whatever it was, snapped shut, but something was happening underneath it. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed into the desk. He should have left. He did not leave. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. The question landed in the room like something small and unexpected. Victoria looked up at him with an expression that said very clearly, "That is an inappropriate question from a maintenance contractor, and I have no idea why you're still standing in my office." But underneath that expression, just beneath it, was something entirely different. "I'm fine," she said. Perfectly even, perfectly controlled. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Not invasively, just honestly. "Okay," he said. And he meant it. Not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement. "I hear you. I'm not going to push." He nodded once, the same quiet nod from the conference room glass, and he and Lily left. In the elevator going down, Lily slipped her hand into his without comment, the way she did sometimes when she sensed that he was thinking about something. He held it. The doors closed. He was thinking about the woman's hands pressed flat against the desk, about the breath that had almost been a word. He had the feeling, not a dramatic feeling, just a quiet, certain one, that this was not the last time he would see Victoria Harmon. He didn't know yet how true that was. He didn't know what was coming. None of them did. Victoria told herself she had forgotten about them by morning. She was good at that, or good at making herself believe it, which was close enough to the same thing to be functionally useful. She woke at 5:45. The way she always did, showered, dressed, brewed her one permitted cup of morning coffee, and stood at the kitchen window of her penthouse apartment, watching the lake turn from black to gray to silver as the sun came up. She thought about the Morrison account. She thought about the quarterly report due to the board in 11 days. She thought about the nursery she still hadn't furnished, which sat behind a closed door in the east hallway, and which she walked past every morning and evening without opening. She did not think about the man in the gray shirt or the child in the yellow dress, except that she did, a little, just around the edges. She arrived at the office at 7:15. Claire had her messages organized by priority, and a revised version of the Henderson contract on the corner of the desk. Victoria signed it, moved through her morning calls, approved the Morrison terms, and was halfway through a review of the Q3 projections when Gerald Weston knocked and entered. Looking like a man delivering information he was mildly uncertain how to frame. "The Henderson crew is back on 3, he said. "Cole and his partner. They opened up the east ceiling panel. Looks like it's a damper seal, like he said. Probably a day's work." Victoria did not look up from the projections. "Good." Gerald lingered. "His daughter isn't with him today. Just so you know." Victoria looked up then. Gerald had the expression of a man who had said one sentence too many and knew it. She held his gaze for a moment with the particular stillness that had made younger associates describe her, in hushed terms, as intimidating. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. "Close the door on your way out." He did. She returned to the projections. She worked for an hour and a half without interruption. Then she did something she hadn't planned and couldn't entirely explain. She took the stairs to the 3rd floor. She told herself she was checking on the Morrison documents, which were still in the 3rd floor conference room. This was technically true. She retrieved them. And on her way back to the stairwell, she passed the east corridor where a ceiling panel had been removed, and a man in a grey shirt was balanced on a work platform, one arm inside the ductwork, a flashlight clamped between his teeth. He heard her footsteps and looked down. He removed the flashlight from his teeth. "Mrs. Harmon." "Mr. Cole." She stopped. It would have been stranger to keep walking. "How's the repair coming?" "Damper seal, like I thought. Should have it sealed and tested by end of day." He looked at her with that same calm, direct attention, not checking her out, not performing deference, just looking at her the way someone looks at a person they're actually talking to. "How are you doing?" The question was simple. It was the same question anyone might ask. And yet, for some reason she couldn't immediately locate. It sat differently than it did when her board members asked it, or her attorney, or the various well-meaning people in her life who had been asking it for 6 months. "Fine," she said. "Standard." "Good," he said. Not pushing, just accepting it. She should have gone back to the stairwell. Instead, she found herself saying, "Your daughter was very sweet yesterday." Something warm moved through his expression. "She liked Deborah's cat. She told me." Victoria paused. "How long have you been raising her alone?" She didn't know why she asked it. It wasn't the kind of question she asked people. Nathan didn't seem thrown by it. He just considered it honestly. 4 years, he said. "Since she was 3. Victoria nodded slowly. "That's a long time." "It's just time," he said simply. "You do what the day asks of you." She stood there another moment, then, "I'll let you get back to it." "Of course." He reached to put the flashlight back between his teeth, then stopped. He looked at her with an expression she would think about later. At her desk, while staring at the Morrison projections without seeing them. It wasn't pity, it wasn't curiosity. It was something quieter, the look of someone who saw something and was choosing carefully, not to say too much too soon. "The baby," he said. "When are you due?" She blinked. Nobody asked her that. Not directly, not anymore. Her staff danced around it. Her board pretended it wasn't happening. Even her friends, the few she hadn't let drift, tended to follow her lead, which meant not bringing it up unless she did. 10 weeks, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. He nodded. "Once. Like the fact meant something." "That's close." "Yes." A silence. Then he said very quietly, "I hope you have somebody." It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't sentimental. It was just honest. Direct in the way that only a person with no hidden agenda can be direct. And something about it, something about the plainness of it. The lack of performance hit her in a place she'd thought she'd sufficiently bricked over. She didn't answer. He must have seen it in her face because he didn't press. He just nodded again, that quiet nod, and turned back to the ductwork. Victoria went back to the stairwell. She climbed slowly, one hand on the rail, the other at her side. She reached the landing between 3 and 4, and she stood there for a moment in the fluorescent quiet of the stairwell and breathed. Just breathed. "I hope you have somebody." She did not have somebody. She had a housekeeper who came Tuesdays. She had Claire, who was wonderful and professional and not someone Victoria would call at 2 in the morning. She had a sister in Phoenix who checked in by text every few weeks. She had a therapist she had seen 3 times and then quietly stopped booking because the appointments had made her feel more exposed than she could manage. She had an attorney, an accountant, a board of 12, and a company of 240 people who depended on her to hold it together. She had a nursery behind a closed door that she walked past every single day. She had Daniel's hand on her lock screen. She stood on the landing and breathed, and did not cry. Because she never cried at work. That was a rule she'd made the first week back after the hospital, and she had held it every day since. Then she went upstairs and worked for 6 more hours and had Claire bring her a sandwich she mostly ate, and signed 4 contracts, and sent 17 emails, and reviewed the Q3 projections, and kept everything moving, the way she always did. But that evening, leaving through the lobby at 7:10, she passed a maintenance cart near the service corridor, Henderson Maintenance stenciled on the side, and stopped. There was a notepad on the cart, a yellow, legal notepad, and on the top page, in careful pencil, was a drawing of a horse. Better than the first one. More confident lines, a proper mane. The legs still slightly wrong, but improving. Lily had left it. Victoria stood in the lobby, the horse drawing in her hands, the building emptying around her. The rain finally stopped after 3 days, the city visible through the glass revolving doors in the particular amber quiet of a Chicago evening. She folded the drawing, slipped it into the pocket of her coat. She walked to the car, and for the first time in 6 months, something in her chest, something she had thought was finished and sealed and done, cracked open, just slightly, like a door pushed by the gentlest possible wind. She didn't know yet what was on the other side. But she was beginning, without meaning to wonder. We're getting to the part of the story that changes everything. So if you haven't already, hit that like button and drop a comment. And please, stay with us. Because what happens in this chapter is something nobody saw coming. The drawing stayed in her coat pocket for 4 days. Victoria was not a sentimental person. Or rather, she had been once, and had carefully dismantled that part of herself after Daniel died, the way you board up windows before a storm. Sentiment was a luxury. Sentiment cost you focus, and focus was the only thing keeping her upright, but the drawing stayed. She moved it from the black coat to her desk drawer on Thursday morning, and on Friday afternoon she found herself looking at it between calls. The careful pencil lines, the improving legs, the mane that someone had worked to get right. She thought about the girl who had drawn it, the easy warmth of her. The way she'd told Victoria about Deborah's cat with the complete seriousness of someone reporting important news. The way she'd slipped her hand into her father's in the elevator without looking, without needing to, just reaching and being held. Victoria thought about that more than she wanted to. On Friday evening, she did something that surprised even herself. She called Gerald Weston at home. "The Henderson contract," she said when he picked up. "The maintenance schedule. Are they coming back next week?" A pause. "The HVAC work is done, but there was a mention of the west stairwell lighting, some wiring that needs updating." "Could be scheduled." "Schedule it," Victoria said. "Early in the week." Another pause. "Any particular reason?" "Building maintenance, Gerald. That's the reason." She hung up. She sat with what she'd just done for a moment. She was a rational woman. She knew what she was doing. She was a rational, grieving 6 months pregnant woman who had just rescheduled a building maintenance call because she wanted to see a man and his daughter again. And she was self-aware enough to know that was both entirely human and at least slightly unwise. She put the thought in the same drawer as the horse drawing and went to bed. Nathan arrived Monday morning with his work partner, a quiet man named Roy, and Lily was not with him. Of course she wasn't. Monday was a school day. Victoria learned this from Claire, who had apparently, without being asked, begun paying quiet attention to the Henderson crew's schedule. "His daughter goes to Riverside Elementary," Claire mentioned, with the specific casualness of someone who knows they're offering information that wasn't requested, but suspects it's wanted. "2nd grade." Victoria looked at her assistant for a long moment. Claire looked back with professional serenity. "Thank you, Claire," Victoria said, and meant it to sound neutral, and was not entirely sure it did. She did not go downstairs that day. She worked. She attended her 11 o'clock with the board, where no one mentioned the baby and she didn't bring it up, and she moved through the agenda with the precision and efficiency that had made her the youngest CEO in Harman Innovation's 30-year history. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. It was the only arena in which she had never, not once, doubted herself. At 4:15, she was in the elevator heading to the parking garage when the doors opened on 2 and Nathan Cole stepped in. He was carrying a toolbox and a coil of wire, and he was clearly on his way out. And he looked at her with the mild, uncalculating surprise of someone who hadn't expected to share an elevator with his client's CEO. He nodded. "Mrs. Harman." "Mr. Cole." She nodded back. The doors closed. They stood in the quiet of the elevator. She was aware of how small the space was, suddenly. Of the slight smell of metal and clean work from his side of the elevator, not unpleasant. Of the fact that he wasn't talking, wasn't filling the silence with anything unnecessary, which was something she usually appreciated in people and was finding right now mildly maddening. "How did the wiring go?" she asked. "West stairwell's done. The junction on Sub 2 still needs replacing, but that's a separate job. He shifted the toolbox. Probably another call. Fine, she said. Schedule it through Gerald. Will do. Silence again. The elevator descended. Then he said, without looking at her, "How are you feeling?" Different from last time. Last time it had been, "Are you all right?" A response to something he'd seen. This was quieter, more general, like someone asking because they actually wanted to know, not because it was the thing you said. "Better than last week," she said. And that, she realized as she said it, was true. Which was strange. He glanced at her. Just briefly. Good. The elevator reached the garage level and the doors opened. He stepped off, turned back. "Lily asked about you," he said. "She wanted to know if you liked the horse." Victoria felt something move in her chest. That same pressure, that same barely hinged feeling from the stairwell landing. She kept her voice even. "Tell her I did. Very much. The mane was particularly impressive." Something close to a smile crossed his face. Not wide, just there. "I'll tell her. She'll want to hear that." A beat. "Good evening, Mrs. Harmon." "Good evening." He walked to his truck. She walked to her car. She sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine, both hands on the steering wheel, the parking garage quiet around her. She thought, I am in serious trouble. Not the frightening kind. Not the kind she was used to. The loss kind. The grief kind. The kind that came at 2 a.m. and pressed its full weight against her sternum until she couldn't breathe. This was a different kind of trouble. Smaller and warmer, and in its own way, more alarming, because she hadn't expected it, and she wasn't sure she knew how to manage something she hadn't expected. She started the car and drove home. That night, for the first time in months, she opened the door to the nursery. She didn't turn on the light. She just stood in the doorway in the dark, one hand on the frame, and looked at the empty room. Bare walls. Dusty hardwood floor. A window facing east. Daniel had said east-facing, because morning light is the best light, and that was the last thing they'd agreed on before everything stopped. She stood there for a long time. Then she closed the door and went to bed. But she left it unlocked. That was new. The following Thursday, she ran into Nathan in the lobby. Genuinely ran into him. No scheduling involved. Just the chaos of two people turning the same corner at the same time. He caught her arm to steady her before she could lose her balance. And let go the instant she was steady, and the whole thing lasted about 3 seconds. "Sorry," he said immediately. "My fault entirely," she said. And then, because the near collision had shaken something loose in her, and she was tired of being careful. "Would you like to have coffee? There's a cafe on the corner." "I have 20 minutes before my 2 o'clock. She watched him process this. He wasn't a man who masked his reactions behind polish. She could see him actually considering it, actually deciding, without performing anything. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." They sat at a corner table by the window, and she ordered tea because the doctor had said 1 coffee a day, and she'd already had it. And he ordered black coffee, and they talked for 22 minutes. Not about the building, not about work. She asked about Lily, what she was like in school, whether the braids were her idea or his. "Hers," he said, without hesitation. "Everything is hers. I just execute." "You do the braids yourself?" "I watched 11 YouTube videos." He said it completely seriously. "I still can't get them even, but she says uneven braids have character." She sounds like a philosopher. She's 7. Everything she says sounds profound. Last week she told me that clouds are just the sky thinking. Victoria looked at him. That's beautiful. She was also eating a peanut butter sandwich at the time. So the effect was somewhat mixed. Victoria laughed. A real one. Not the small, involuntary one from the office. This one came from somewhere lower, somewhere she'd forgotten about. It lasted longer than she meant it to. Nathan looked at her while she laughed with an expression she couldn't quite classify. It wasn't romantic exactly. It was more like relief, like someone watching a window open that they'd worried was permanently sealed. She stopped laughing and looked at her tea. I haven't done that in a while, she said quietly. I noticed, he said, just as quietly. No pity, just acknowledgement. They sat with that for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. That first day, in the elevator. She looked at him. You said you hoped I had somebody. Why did you say that? He thought about it. Honestly, visibly. Because you looked like someone who'd been told too many times to be fine, and had started to believe she had no other option. A pause. And because you're about to have a baby, and you were standing in a stairwell alone. Victoria looked at the window. The street outside, people passing, the ordinary world moving at its ordinary pace. I don't, she said. Then, have somebody. My husband died in October. I've been managing. She hadn't said it that plainly to anyone. Not even to Claire. She said it to Nathan Cole in a cafe on a Thursday afternoon with 22 minutes on the clock, and it came out without performance, without bracing herself first. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't look at her with that particular expression she'd learned to dread. The expression that was really about the other person's discomfort dressed up as sympathy. He just looked at her and said, That's a hard thing to carry alone. Yes, she said, it is. The 2 o'clock alarm on her phone went off. She silenced it, gathered her coat, stood. He stood when she did, automatic, natural. Thank you for the coffee, she said. Tea, he corrected gently. Another almost laugh. Thank you for the tea. She walked back to the building. She didn't look back. But she was smiling slightly, against her will, all the way through the lobby and into the elevator. She did not tell herself it meant nothing. She had decided to stop lying to herself about small things. It was a beginning. We are almost at the end, and I promise you, what is coming in this chapter is something you will not see coming. If you've made it this far, leave a comment right now. And please, don't go anywhere. 3 weeks passed. They had coffee, tea, twice more. Then Nathan started texting. Just occasionally. Just small things. A photo of Lily's latest drawing. A question about whether the building's south entrance was being repainted because Roy wanted to know. Victoria answered. She started it sometimes. A question about Riverside Elementary's spring schedule. Not for any real reason. Just because she was curious. A message at 9:15 on a Tuesday that said only, She's right about the clouds. He sent back a single line. I'll tell her you said so. She'll be insufferably pleased. It was nothing. It was also, somehow, everything she had. A thin, warm thread in a winter that had lasted 6 months and showed no sign of spring. She was 7 months along now. The baby moved regularly, at night mostly, and during long meetings, as if sensing that Victoria needed to remember it was there. She had finally, 2 weeks ago, opened the nursery properly. She'd ordered paint, a soft sage green, Daniel's second choice, because she couldn't bring herself to use his first choice, which had been a pale yellow that now made her think of Lily's dress, and she wasn't ready to untangle that particular feeling. She had bought a crib, a bookshelf, a small white rocking chair. She had sat in the rocking chair the first night it arrived, in an unpainted room with cardboard boxes stacked against the walls, and rocked slowly, hands folded on her belly, and let herself think about Daniel for the first time without shutting it down. She thought about his laugh, his hand on her stomach, the Positano photograph. She thought about the fact that he would have been a good father, not perfect, not effortless, but the trying kind, the showing up kind, the kind who would have watched YouTube videos about braids. She had cried then. Finally, properly, for a long time, in the rocking chair in the dark. She felt afterward, not better exactly, but emptier in a way that was cleaner. Like something had been let out that needed letting. She told Nathan about it, the next time they met. Not all of it. Just that she'd finally set up the nursery. He'd looked at her the way he always looked at her, present, unhurried, and said, How did it feel? Like something I should have done 2 months ago, she said, and like something I wasn't ready for until now. That's how most things work, he said. I'm beginning to think you have a saying for everything. Lily does. I just borrow hers. She had learned more about him by then. He'd grown up in Evanston, the middle of 3 brothers. His mother was still there, a retired schoolteacher named Carol who had, Nathan said, strong opinions about casseroles and everything else. He had run his own business for a decade, was careful with money, was the kind of man who remembered small things people mentioned and asked about them later. He had never, he told her once with no particular drama, dated anyone since Dana left. 4 years is a long time, she said. Lily needed stability, he said. So did I. He looked at his coffee. Bringing someone into her life, it has to mean something. I won't do it if it doesn't mean something. Victoria had held that sentence for a long time afterward, turned it over, looked at it from different angles. She was thinking about it on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the cafe, when her phone rang and it was a number she didn't recognize. An area code she placed after a moment as Portland, Oregon. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. The voice on the other end was a woman's, careful, slightly formal. Is this Victoria Harmon? It is. I'm sorry to call out of the blue. A pause. My name is Dana Cole. I believe you know my ex-husband. Victoria sat very still on her couch. Dana Cole spoke for 9 minutes. Victoria did not interrupt once. The story Dana told was this. She had left Nathan and Lily 4 years ago. She had moved to Portland. She had, in the intervening years, rebuilt her life, a new relationship, a job she found meaningful, a life she described as genuinely good. But she had recently learned something, a health diagnosis. Not terminal. She was careful to say that, twice, but significant. Serious enough that she had started thinking about things she'd left unfinished. People she'd let go without resolution. She hadn't called Nathan. She was calling Victoria because someone had mentioned her name. A mutual contact from their Evanston neighborhood. A woman named Patrice who knew both Dana and Gerald Weston. And Dana had heard that Nathan was working in Victoria's building and that they had, in some form or another, become friendly. I'm not calling to interfere, Dana said. I want you to understand that. I left. That was my choice, and I stand by it even if I'd make it differently now. A pause. But Nathan, he doesn't let people in. He hasn't in 4 years. If you're someone he talks to, that means something. And I wanted you to know, from someone who knows him well, that he is exactly who he appears to be. There are no complications waiting, no hidden version of him. What you see is what's there. Silence on the line. Why are you telling me this? Victoria asked. A long pause. Because I wasn't someone who deserved what he gave me. And I think you might be. After Dana hung up, Victoria sat on the couch for a very long time without moving. She thought about everything at once. About Daniel, and the lock screen she still hadn't changed, and whether that was loyalty or avoidance or something that deserved a more complicated name. About the nursery and the rocking chair and the crack in the wall she'd let in. About a man in a grey shirt who had looked at her through conference room glass and nodded like it was simple. Like being seen didn't have to be frightening. She picked up her phone. She started a message. She stopped. She started again. She wrote, "Can we talk tomorrow? Not coffee, just talk." He replied within 4 minutes. "Yes. Tell me when and where." She sent him her address. Then she sat with what she'd done, phone in her hands, the city quiet below her penthouse windows, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. Not joy, too soon for that, maybe too fragile, but something adjacent to it. Something that lived just next door. Something like the first morning after a very long winter, when you walk outside and the air is still cold but the light has changed. And you know in your body, before your mind catches up, that something is turning. She looked at her phone. Changed her lock screen. Not to a blank screen, not to something neutral, to the photograph of the horse drawing, Lily's horse, careful pencil lines, a proper mane, that she had taken that first night in the lobby. She went to bed. She slept through the night for the first time since October. In the morning, Nathan Cole rang her doorbell at 10 o'clock, carrying 2 cups from the cafe on the corner, 1 coffee, 1 tea. And when she opened the door, he looked at her for a moment with that same calm, direct, unborrowed attention, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said yet. She stepped back to let him in. And then, there, in the foyer of her penthouse, with the east light coming through the windows and 8 weeks left until the baby and her whole life rearranged around an absence she was still learning to carry, he looked at her and said the thing no one had said, the thing she hadn't known she needed to hear until she heard it. "I want you to know," Nathan said quietly, "that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is, whatever you need it to be, I'm here, and I mean that about you." A pause, so brief it was almost nothing. "And the baby?" Victoria stood in her foyer and looked at the man in the gray shirt and felt every wall she'd built. Every carefully boarded window, every door held shut by effort and pride and grief. She felt all of it tremble. Not fall. Tremble. Like the first motion of something enormous and long still, beginning, slowly, to move. "You don't know what you're saying," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he said. "I just wanted you to hear it." She didn't cry. She'd cried in the rocking chair. That had been for Daniel, and for everything that was gone. And it was done. This was different. This was not grief. This was something that needed a different word. Something she hadn't used in so long she wasn't sure she still knew how to hold it. She stepped forward. She took the cup of tea from his hand. Their fingers were close but did not quite touch. And that almost touch was somehow exactly right. "Come in," she said. He came in. Outside the east windows, the city was bright and unhurried. Below, the street moved at its ordinary pace. Somewhere across town, Lily Cole was in 2nd grade learning something, probably already planning her next drawing. And in a penthouse on the 42nd floor, something quiet and enormous and long overdue was just beginning. This is the final chapter, and if you've been here from the beginning, you already know this story is unlike any other. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and stay until the very last word, because the ending holds something we haven't told you yet. 8 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in late March, Victoria Harmon's son was born. His name was Daniel James Harmon. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair, his father's hair, which Victoria had not expected, and which made her laugh and cry at the same time in the delivery room, the way only the most specific and irreducible forms of beauty can do. He had her eyes. He had Daniel's chin. He was, the nurse said, perfectly healthy. He screamed once with great conviction, and then settled into her arms like he had been there before. Nathan was not in the delivery room. That was right. That was correct. There were things that belonged to Daniel and Victoria alone, and this was one of them. This first moment. This first wait. This first specific smell of a new person who had never existed before. Nathan understood that without being told. He had waited in the hall with Carol, his mother, who Victoria had met 6 weeks earlier, and who had immediately set about forming her own opinions about everything. Warmly and without apology, which Victoria had found more comforting than she expected. When the nurse came out and said Victoria was ready for visitors, Nathan and Carol came in together. Carol cried immediately and made no attempt to hide it. Nathan stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Victoria holding the baby. And his expression was the quietest and most complete thing Victoria had ever seen on a human face. "He's here," Victoria said. "He's here," Nathan said. Nothing else needed adding. In the weeks that followed, the shape of their life arranged itself the way real things arrange themselves, not all at once. Not dramatically, but in small increments, each one natural and unforced. Nathan did not move in. That wasn't where they were. But he was there most mornings, arriving with coffee and tea and sometimes Lily, who had been told about the baby in careful, honest terms, and had responded by immediately beginning to draw a portrait of him. even though she had not yet met him. She was working from the evidence of photographs and her own considerable creative interpretation. The portrait was, Nathan told Victoria one evening, something between a baby and a small, wise elder. "She says he has an old soul," Nathan said. "He's 3 weeks old," Victoria said. To be fair, she said the same thing about a potato she found in the garden last summer. Victoria looked at him. He looked at her. They were sitting in the kitchen of her penthouse at 8 in the evening, with the baby asleep in the next room and the city doing its quiet nighttime things below the windows. And this, just this, the ordinary nothing of it, was the most at home Victoria had felt in a very long time. The day Lily finally met Daniel James was a Sunday in April, a week after he came home from the hospital. She arrived with Nathan, carrying the completed portrait in a cardboard folder she'd decorated with stickers, and she walked into the living room with the solemnity of someone attending something important. Victoria sat on the couch holding the baby and watched Lily approach with wide, careful brown eyes. Lily looked at the baby for a long time. Then she reached into her folder and produced the portrait. She held it up beside the baby's face, comparing. "His nose is different than I thought," she said, with the tone of an artist noting a discrepancy. "But the eyes are right." She lowered the portrait. "Can I give it to him?" "You can put it on his shelf," Victoria said gently. "In his room." Lily went down the hall, found the nursery, the sage-green walls, the white crib, the small bookshelf, and placed the portrait on the shelf with the care of someone installing something important. Then she came back, climbed onto the couch beside Victoria with the fearless ease of a child who had never been taught that she wasn't welcome, and looked at the baby again. "He's smaller than I expected," she said. "He'll grow," Victoria said. "I know." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, in a completely different tone, lower, private, the voice she seemed to use for things that actually mattered. "Are you going to be okay?" Victoria looked at this 7-year-old child with her summer wheat braids and her enormous brown eyes and the gravity of someone 3 times her age, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel in this direction. She felt taken care of. "Yes," Victoria said, and it was the truest thing she had said in a very long time. "I really think I am." Lily nodded, satisfied. She looked back at the baby. Nathan stood in the doorway of the living room watching them, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the room wasn't already saying. What nobody knew that Sunday in April, what nobody had known yet, was that 2 days earlier, Victoria's attorney had received a document request. It came from Daniel's estate trustees, flagged for her attention, a sealed file from Daniel's private holdings that had not been opened at the time of probate, because it had been filed under a subsidiary trust she hadn't known existed. She had asked her attorney to open it. The file contained a letter from Daniel, written 6 weeks before he died. He had written it on a Tuesday, the same day of the week he would later die, which struck her later as a coincidence that felt too large to be only coincidence. The letter said many things. It said he loved her. It said he was proud of the company they had built. It said he had known for a while that something in him was not right, not medically, not in any diagnosable way, but in the way a person sometimes knows things about themselves that they don't have the courage to say directly. He wrote that he had been struggling with something he hadn't found words for yet, and that he had been planning to talk to her, really talk to her, when the baby came. He had written, "I don't know what the future looks like, but I know you, Victoria. I know you'll find your way through whatever comes. You always have. And I know, I don't know how, but I know, that you won't be alone. You're not someone the world will leave alone. It doesn't work that way for people like you." The last line of the letter said, "Take care of yourself. Let someone take care of you too. You're allowed." She had read the letter sitting at her kitchen table at 6 in the morning. Daniel James asleep in the other room, the city still dark outside the windows, and she had held it in both hands and cried the way she had cried in the rocking chair. Fully, truly, without managing it. Not for what was lost. For what he had known, and trusted, and let go of. For the fact that somehow, across months and grief and a chance encounter in a conference room on a rainy day, his last wish for her had come true. She hadn't told Nathan about the letter yet. She would. There was no rush. They had time. That was the part she kept coming back to in the days that followed. Time. For months she had experienced time as a weight, each day another stone added to a load she was carrying alone. Now it had changed into something different. Not light, exactly. Not effortless. But open. Possible. On the last Sunday of April, Nathan brought Lily and Carol to the park 2 blocks from Victoria's building. It was one of those Chicago spring days that arrives like a gift. 65 degrees, clear sky, the lake visible in the distance as a ribbon of flat blue. Victoria pushed the stroller slowly and Nathan walked beside her and Carol walked ahead with Lily, who was explaining something with great animation, hands moving, Carol nodding with absolute seriousness. "What is she telling her?" Victoria asked. "Impossible to say," Nathan said. "Could be cloud theory. Could be the horse-drawing curriculum she's developing. Could be a detailed critique of my braiding technique. The braids have improved. 14 videos now." Victoria smiled. They walked. The park moved around them. Other families, dogs, the sound of children on the distant playground. Ordinary Sunday sounds. The baby slept in the stroller with the focused commitment of someone who had somewhere to be in his dreams. At a certain point, not planned, not announced, Nathan's hand came to rest beside hers on the stroller handle. Not holding her hand. Just there. Close. Present. She looked at it. Then she looked ahead. She moved her hand so that it covered his. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. Ahead, Lily was pulling Carol toward the swings, laughing at something, the sound of it carrying back to them on the spring air, bright and sudden and completely unguarded. The same laugh from the conference room that had stopped Victoria in a hallway 6 months ago and started everything. She thought about Daniel's letter. "Let someone take care of you, too. You're allowed." She thought about the nursery with the sage-green walls, about the rocking chair and what she'd let go of in it, about a horse drawing on a legal pad and the way a small girl's laugh could change the temperature of a room. She thought about all of it, and then she let herself stop thinking and just walked, through the bright April park, hand resting on the hand of a man who had seen her at her most carefully closed and had waited, without pressure and without agenda, for the door to open on its own. It had opened. She was walking through it. There are moments in a life that don't announce themselves as turning points while they're happening. They look like ordinary Sundays. They feel like a hand on a stroller handle, a child laughing ahead of you on a path, a sky too blue to be accounted for. They only become turning points in retrospect when you look back from wherever you've arrived and realize that was it. That was the moment the long winter ended and something began to grow. This was that moment. And Victoria Harmon, 32 years old, CEO, widow, mother, woman who had learned to let a door open, walked into what came next with her eyes clear and her hands no longer cold and the full, unhurried weight of a future she had not expected and had somehow, miraculously, been given anyway. Behind her, in Lily's voice, the laugh came again. And this time, no hesitation, no catching herself, no managing it back into silence. Victoria laughed too.